Namaste, and welcome to another episode of the Vichar Manthan Sustainable Narratives podcast. Very excited today to introduce to you all the vertical of wealth. Now, wealth sometimes get coined in a negative light. Money and greed go synonymously, but really we should be thinking about wealth as something positive, a tool that we can all use throughout society. After all, we can't do without it. Very excited today to bring Janvi Ben Dadakar onto the platform. Janvi ji has been on the Vichar Manthan platform before. For those that don't know, she's the CEO of the Academy for Board Excellence and a governance lead in that space. Janvi ji, welcome to the podcast.
Hi there, Sumit. Namaste.
Thank you for joining us here today, and very excited to bring you on to talk about Vichar Manthan's Sustainable Narratives Conference this year, and in particular the wealth vertical that we're talking about. So could you just share with us why you think something like wealth is important to society?
Yes, so I'm really privileged to be chairing the session that is going to be on markets, whether it's a panacea or a willful ignorance. And the topic's really going to look at these sort of extremes that society has got into in all their debates and narratives. And everything seems to be an extreme now. So you're either really wealthy and you're this right-wing person that's all about capitalism, or the other extreme, which is you're some left-wing, liberal, woke person that doesn't want any money. But actually, it's a continuum. And even if we look at some of the theorists that were there and the academics, that you did sort of tend to get some extreme views. So Friedman, as it says in the blurb to this session that we're going to be doing, argued that any arguments against free markets is an argument against freedom itself. So you've got this one extreme that believes the capital markets will sort themselves out, corporates will sort themselves out. But then you have the other extreme, which is talking about actually we need people, we need to think about purpose. But I think it's a continuum, and I think it's really important that we debate it, discuss it, particularly through this dharmic lens, which, in my view, isn't as extreme in anything that it looks at. Everything is seen as this continuum, almost a spiral of there's no rights and wrongs, but we need to look at things. So I'm really looking forward to this debate because we'll be doing it. I'll be chairing and speaking with David Halpin, who heads up the Business Insights team. So really looking forward to it. And we'll be looking at culture, because for me, leadership mindsets is a huge part of this discussion and debate, rather than just looking at it from a purely academic perspective, and how we create the right mindsets in people. Certainly, I'm sure that's where David will be coming from with his behavioral insights background and psychology and policy background.
Sure. No, definitely sounds interesting. And I think we're very excited to here at Vichar Manthan to be hosting a fireside conversation on exactly this topic. And I think you're right. The way we look at the world sometimes is in extremes. And when we're talking about wealth in particular, the divide between rich and poor, or between right and left, economically, politically, socially, tends to be at the peripheries, at those edge cases. But the vast majority of people do live in that middle ground. So also very interesting that sort of dharmic concepts that you were mentioning there as well, where it is about the sustenance and keeping that movement going internally for the majority of people, I think at a deeper level. Was it also Friedman that believed in small government and limited regulation? And does that not bring in issues of governance and the struggle for power, especially when it comes to wealth? I think especially here in the West, wealth is deemed the terms of success almost, and a fruitful person is a wealthy person. But maybe you're going to bring about questions that challenge some of those narratives and actually show a more dharmic way of looking at things. Isn't necessarily the richest person in the room isn't the happiest.
One of the things that I'd really like to explore with David is how he works with government, because he works with government, and this whole behavioral insights concept is something that has been adopted globally by various governments across the US, Japan, UK, and with the sort of change in governance and government that we're going to have in the UK, it's going to be very interesting how policy shifts people's behaviours. And are we going to get even more extremes, or are we going to get more regulation? The current government, as I understand it, is going to be looking at deregulation, and they believe that in itself will be a big cure. It will open up everything, and it will be up to the markets to choose. But on the other hand, if we see perhaps the most free sort of capitalistic country in the world, US, and you see some of the problems that big corporates have caused there. From a governance perspective, I really think it's going to be important to say, well, where's the balance with all of this? Where do we create the right thinking? And perhaps dharmic thinking has something to offer the West, because what we believe in is much more around that sort of duties concepts. And therefore, if rather than regulation necessarily, it's about, can we create the right mindsets in people so that they feel they have the duty to do the right thing. So ultimately, what I'd really like to explore is, when you're doing all this policy, whether you use regulation, whether you use nudging, which seems to be a big concept that the behavioral insights team is pushing, whatever you use, how do you ensure though the ethics behind it create the right behavior in all of people, rather than just a select few? And in particular, if you are going to have such inequity in society, how do you make sure the leadership has the right mindset? Because without that, all I can see is a deepening divide that cannot be good for anybody, because everybody is reliant on someone else. We as human beings are reliant on, our not just our human stakeholders, but the environment and everything around us. And that, to me, is at the core of Dharma. So it will be very interesting to sort of see how we marry up all the concepts that have come out of the West with this concept of Dharma, and behaviors, leadership mindset, policy setting, regulation and markets.
Very interesting. Lots of great concepts there, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. And for those that haven't registered yet, please do go on to vicharamanthan.org, register for the Sustainable Narratives Conference. It is an exclusive event. You can't catch it for free or on YouTube or anything like that. You do need to register. You do need to log on to AirMeet, the exclusive platform for this conference, and in particular the wealth vertical here, which we're discussing today with Janvi-Ben, and the fireside conversation that she will be sharing with David Halpern about markets, panacea, or willful ignorance. Interesting concepts you brought up there about dharmic attitudes and making sure we're working holistically for the betterment of society, and not just for the elite, or not just focusing on the divide there. It was only just announced recently that India has taken over the UK in its economy, beating the former colonizers, and only in the last 70 to 75 years rebuilt themselves from scratch after being colonized for 200-300 years plus. So definitely, I think we have something to learn here in the West from an ancient civilization, a dharmic civilization, and having the attitudes and the holistic approach that actually society is for everyone, and not just a select few. So great conversations there. Janvi-Ben, thank you for joining us. Is there a final call or a message or a question you think our audience should be thinking about when they attend Sustainable Narratives, or in particular the fireside conversation that you will be hosting?
Well, I'm sure we'll get 100 questions when David starts speaking. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I think there's a lot we can explore, and I'd encourage everybody, young and old, to come on here, because also I think that's another area where we really can explore it, this sort of divide between everybody thinks young people are young woke people that are left-wing liberals that don't understand, and equally this whole sort of global concept that we're looking at. You know, what can we learn from other countries? How can we use what is being used in governance, what's being used in policy making and behavioral insights to nudge people into the right way of thinking? But in order to do that, we need everybody to participate in this discussion. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from lots and lots of different people on that day, and any ideas, any questions. I'm sure the team at Vicharamanthan will be forwarding those questions. So I suppose the last thought I would leave everybody with is, you know, where do we want to go with society? And where do we want these wealthy people, or how do we want to create wealth is I suppose the question I would leave everyone with. How shall we do it in a dharmic way?
Excellent. Thank you for summing that up. And I just want to pick up on one thread very quickly, if I can. You talked about nudging theory, right? To me, that just sounds like more persuasion techniques. Whereas what you referred to earlier with dharmic concepts is actually how do we challenge policies and narratives for the greater good, and not just in particular. So I'll be pushing that question into AirMeet once the platform is live. And for everyone else, right, this is just one fireside conversation taking place in the wealth vertical. There are other fireside conversations talking about what money is it a problem, how do we benefit from it, and the main panel discussion taking place in wealth about rethinking capital and the path towards sustainable growth. So please do register. Go onto vicharamanthan.org, register for your ticket for the Sustainable Narratives Conference 2022. And I look forward to seeing you, as many of you as possible. Thank you and namaste.